wind on Oxera 9 was dry and sharp, the kind that sliced through layers of clothing and clung to the skin like static. As Taro Ramirez stumbled to her feet on the uneven terrain, she blinked against the harsh twin suns glaring down from a deep ochre sky. Around her, chaos unfolded. Competitors from over 25 alien species materialized in a wide semicircle, each disoriented, stripped of weapons, armor, scanners, everything but basic clothing suited to their biology. Technology had been neutralized the moment their feet hit the soil. The rules were simple. No tools, no comms, no outside help. Survive for 7 days. No one had explained what survive really meant. Tara didn't panic. Her boots sank slightly into the dusty, cracked surface beneath her, and she instinctively crouched to feel the dirt. It was coarse, dry, and hot, sun-baked to the point of forming a thin crust over what she suspected was more fertile material underneath. A few feet away, a 4-armed creature with transparent membranes flapping from its shoulders howled in confusion. To her left, a group of reptilian warriors barked at each other in what sounded like military cadence, pointing in several directions. Many just stood still, frozen in analysis paralysis. Tara took a breath. Her heart pounded. Adrenaline always did that at the start of something unknown. But her mind was steady. She was no stranger to isolation. Before becoming Earth's candidate for the primitive trials, she had spent years training others in real-world wilderness survival. Deserts, forests, icy tundras. She had slept under more stars than roofs. What she saw around her wasn't impossible, it was just unfamiliar. A voice echoed through the valley, calm but cold. It belonged to the Arbiter, a sentient AI overseeing the competition. Survive using only what the planet offers. All forms of technology are disabled. Actions are recorded. Judgment in 7 rotations. The transmission ended. No instructions, no guides. Tara didn't waste time. Others began shouting, forming cliques, arguing over where to go. She quietly scanned the horizon. The landscape stretched flat for kilometers, broken only by occasional jagged formations that looked like petrified coral or fractured bones. Distantly, there were signs of vegetation. Barely, but enough. She chose that direction. She walked away while others debated, her boots crunching over brittle rocks. Several species ignored her. One tall, obsidian-colored humanoid sneered at her with a soundless expression and turned away. She didn't care. Popularity wouldn't save anyone out here. Within an hour, she reached the edge of what could barely be called a forest. It was more like a skeletal thicket. Dry, spindly trees with bark that flaked like old paint and no visible leaves. Still, it was better than the open plain. She found a shaded alcove beneath an overhanging root structure and took stock of her immediate needs. Fire, shelter, water. In that order. Back on Earth, she'd taught the rule of 3s. 3 hours without shelter, 3 days without water, 3 weeks without food. Oxygen wasn't an issue here. Despite the alien planet, the Arbiter ensured breathable atmospheres for all participants. But temperature fluctuations on this type of planet could be deadly. She needed fire before nightfall. She searched for stones, something with sharp edges, something that might produce sparks. It took 20 minutes, but she found a pair. One smooth, heavy like iron, the other coarse and flaky. She struck them together. Nothing. She adjusted angles, tried different motions. A puff of smoke, then again. A tiny spark. It died. She didn't give up. With the sun climbing toward its zenith, she collected dried grasses, brittle twigs, and fibrous strips from a cracked plant trunk nearby. She formed a nest of tinder. Kneeling down, she tried again. Her hands ached. Her wrists trembled. She cursed under her breath. The 4th spark caught barely, and she bent close, coaxing it with shallow breath. It grew into a flickering ember. She fed it slowly, carefully, until it became a modest flame. Relief surged through her. She had fire. While keeping the flame alive, she began shaping a shelter. She lacked tools, but the trees here were brittle enough to snap under pressure. She built a lean-to with a natural rock face behind her, weaving thin branches between upright poles and covering the gaps with thick clumps of dry vegetation. She pinned the loose ends under rocks and weighed the roof down with twisted vines. It wouldn't survive a storm, but it would trap body heat and provide shade. By mid-afternoon, she rested beside her tiny fire. The heat was intense. She rationed her breath to avoid hyperventilating. She still needed water, but she'd observed a faint shimmer in the far distance, either a mirage or a water source. She'd check tomorrow. Tonight, she'd survive. Screams echoed from the plains. Some were in languages she didn't understand. Others were universal: panic, pain, confusion. A shrieking avian competitor had fallen into a crevasse. A silicon-based being curled into a ball, overheating under the sun. Most of them weren't prepared for a world without tech. Tara couldn't help them all. Not yet. She focused inward. As the suns lowered and shadows stretched, the temperature dropped faster than she expected. The air turned icy. Her fire flickered low, and she fed it what little fuel she had left. She huddled close, wrapping herself in layers of plant fiber she'd fashioned into rough padding. Her body ached. Her fingers were raw from stone striking and bark gathering. But she was alive, and alone, and most importantly, in control. She lay back on the packed dirt floor of her shelter, staring up at a foreign sky filled with 3 moons and a spray of purple constellations. This was day 1. She had 6 more to prove Earth's worth, and her own. And unlike most of her competitors, she knew exactly how to begin. The night had passed in fragmented sleep, with Tara waking often to feed the dwindling fire or adjust the padded vines that covered her shoulders. Morning brought sharp contrasts, scorching light and bone-dry air. The landscape outside her makeshift shelter had shifted slightly under the wind, leaving a soft dusting of ash-colored sediment across her supplies. She shook off the debris and stood slowly, her muscles stiff from the uneven ground. She walked toward the east, following the vague shimmer she had noted the day before. Her fire had survived the night, a small miracle in itself, and she had banked the coals with ash to keep them warm until her return. She had nothing to store water in, nothing to purify it with, not yet. But today's goal was clear. She needed to locate a usable source before dehydration crept in. Her throat already felt rough, her lips dry at the corners. A single day without hydration would begin affecting judgment, and in this place, that was a luxury no one could afford. The land sloped gently downward as she walked, and she noticed subtle changes in the ecosystem. The brittle trees began to grow denser, their trunks stained with mineral residue. Pale insects darted between crevices in the rock, and she followed their patterns. On Earth, insects often hinted at moisture or decay, both useful signs. After an hour of weaving between low shrubs and broken terrain, she heard it. A soft trickling sound, almost indistinguishable from the wind. She crouched and moved slowly toward it, her pulse quickening. Behind a jagged outcrop, she found it. A slow-moving stream, no more than half a meter wide, winding its way between patches of dark moss and glimmering rock. The water was cloudy, tinted slightly green. It didn't look safe. She knelt beside it, examining it with care. There was algae on the surface and a strange oily shimmer in certain patches. She dipped a finger into the water, held it to her nose, an acrid, sour scent. Then to her tongue. She tasted nothing alarming, but she didn't trust it. She remembered a technique from Earth, improvised water filtration using charcoal, sand, and gravel. She could recreate that here. She began collecting the needed components. From a nearby area where she had burned last night's wood, she scraped charcoal into a shallow pit and ground it to fine dust. She then gathered sand and small pebbles from the bank. Using a wide piece of bark, she shaped a makeshift cone and layered the materials, large rocks at the bottom, then finer gravel, then sand, then crushed charcoal on top. She poured the stream water through it and watched as it slowly dripped out the bottom, clearer, less murky. She repeated the process 3 times before collecting it in a shallow stone basin she had hollowed out with persistent chipping. To complete the purification, she needed to boil it. She carried the filtered water back to her camp, steadying the basin in both hands. Her fire had cooled but still held embers. She fed it dry sticks and coaxed the flames higher. Then she nestled the basin beside it, angling it so the heat would gradually raise the temperature. The basin hissed slightly as the water reached a low boil. She waited until a steady bubbling formed before removing it from the edge and letting it cool. Once cooled, She sipped cautiously. It tasted earthy but clean. Her stomach didn't cramp. No nausea followed. It was safe. With water secured, she allowed herself a moment to breathe. She sat cross-legged near the fire and noticed how silent the surroundings had become. Occasionally, a distant screech or the rhythmic stomping of something enormous reminded her that she was far from alone. But in her small pocket of the world, she had created peace. She observed the sky, noted the angle of the suns, and calculated she had 6 hours of usable light remaining. Next came cleanliness. She had already begun to feel grime building up, sweat, ash, dirt under her nails. A clean body meant fewer infections, less skin irritation, and better morale. She scouted the perimeter of her shelter for anything resembling soap plants or oil-rich vegetation. After a careful search, she stumbled across a cluster of low-lying shrubs bearing knobby pods with translucent skin. When she squeezed one, it released a slippery substance that foamed lightly when rubbed between her fingers. Curious, she scraped the pulp into a flat rock and added water. The mixture bubbled faintly, releasing a bitter, citrus-like scent. She tested it on her arm. No irritation. She rubbed it on her hands, added a little ash from her fire, and found it lathered surprisingly well. She had discovered a natural form of saponin, the same substance used in Earth's soap berries. She gathered more pods, crushed them, and stored the pulp in a concave slab for future use. Returning to her shelter, she used the soapy mixture to scrub her face, hands, and forearms. The water from the stream, now cooled, served as her rinse. The sensation was a revelation. Clarity returned to her thoughts. Her skin breathed again. In an environment where most competitors were likely deteriorating rapidly, this single act gave her a tangible edge. She didn't stop there. She used additional charcoal to line the base of her shelter, absorbing moisture and odor. She braided dry vines into a simple net and hung the soap pods to dry. She even began experimenting with oil from the plant's seeds, pressing it between stones to see if she could make a balm or preservative. Every small success reinforced her confidence. Her body might not be the strongest, nor her species the most feared, but she understood nature. She understood the ancient art of working with it, not fighting against it. Later that afternoon, as she adjusted her netting and sharpened a stone for potential tool use, a shadow moved across the edge of her vision. She turned sharply. A figure stood beyond the tree line, a tall insectoid being, its chitin cracked, its movements sluggish. He was alone, trembling, his compound eyes locked on her water basin. He stepped forward but staggered. She raised her hands slowly, non-threatening. He collapsed before she reached him. She knelt beside him and pressed 2 fingers to where his neck should be. His skin was ice cold, his limbs twitching. She lifted his head gently and poured a few sips of water into his mandibles. He drank weakly, not resisting. She soaked a cloth-like leaf in the stream and wiped the dust from his face. His body shuddered, then stilled. After a long moment, his eyes opened again, slightly clearer now. He didn't speak, neither did she. He didn't have to. She helped him sit up and moved him near the fire. With slow, careful gestures, she indicated the soap pods, the filter, the boiling basin. He watched, too weak to respond, but his eyes never left hers. As night approached again, she prepared a second portion of filtered water and a larger fire. She built a crude mat from woven bark and leaves for her unexpected guest. As the fire crackled and the alien breathed slowly beside her, Tara realized something important. In this trial, survival wasn't about proving strength. It was about creating systems, reliable, repeatable, and shareable. If others began arriving at her camp, she wouldn't turn them away. Not if they were willing to learn. She stared up at the moons again, 3 luminous coins in the dusk sky, and allowed herself a moment of quiet satisfaction. Tomorrow, she'd teach someone how to survive. The insectoid being, whose name Tara later learned was Crix, remained unconscious through the second night. She stayed close to the fire, shifting the embers when the wind gusted and occasionally pressing a warm, soaked cloth against his thorax to keep him hydrated. He was badly dehydrated and appeared to have suffered sunburn along the ridges of his chitin, which had cracked in several places. Tara recognized the signs of systemic fatigue. His limbs twitched involuntarily, and his antennae drooped as if weighted. She wasn't a medic, but she understood exhaustion when she saw it. At dawn, he stirred. His voice was raspy and heavily accented. "Water." "Soap," was all he managed before slumping again. Tara crouched beside him and passed him a small carved scoop filled with warm, filtered water. He drank slowly, deliberately, as if the motion required conscious thought. When he finished, he attempted to sit up, but winced sharply. His legs had stiffened overnight. "You need rest," she said softly, though she knew he wouldn't understand her words. She placed a hand on his shoulder and made a calming gesture. He nodded weakly. She brought him another scoop of water and then turned to check the fire. As the morning light intensified, she spotted movement beyond the trees. Not a predator, but something else. Another participant stumbled into view, a quadrupedal creature with a thick mane of silver filaments. The alien's breathing was ragged, and her eyes, though shielded by bony ridges, were sunken. The creature hesitated at the edge of the thicket, sniffed the air, and then began limping toward the shelter. Tara stood, hands at her sides. She said nothing and didn't move. The alien collapsed just a few meters from the fire. Tara rushed forward and confirmed that the new arrival was breathing, though her pulse was faint and irregular. A gash ran along her left flank, deep and caked with dust. Tara fetched clean water and carefully rinsed the wound, noting that the alien didn't flinch. She was barely conscious. That morning was spent tending to 2 patients. Tara rotated warm compresses, coaxed small amounts of water into each mouth, and reinforced the shade overhead using larger bark panels. She layered more charcoal beneath the bedding area to trap moisture and prevent bacterial growth. Her movements were efficient but gentle. She didn't have time to wonder how many more would arrive. She just knew that they would. By noon, another shadow passed between the twisted trees. This time it was a tall, broad-shouldered avian creature with gleaming blue feathers and a cracked beak. He didn't fall. He stood just outside the camp's perimeter and watched silently. Tara met his gaze, then pointed toward a flat rock where more purified water waited. He tilted his head once and moved forward with slow, cautious steps. He drank. Then he sat down beside the fire and nodded to her once, deliberately. No words were exchanged. None were needed. She knew what his presence meant. Word was spreading. By the 3rd day, her shelter had expanded into a small enclave. She had reinforced the original lean-to and added extensions using pliable tree limbs, bark, and tightly packed vines. The fire pit had grown in size and was now encircled by carefully placed stones to protect it from wind. Several bowls of soaking plant material sat nearby, and an area had been cleared for washing. A pile of soap pods lay under a shaded overhang, drying in the filtered light. Tara had begun organizing the tasks around her. She taught Crix how to crush the soap pods, boil water, and layer the filtration components in the correct order. The quadruped, whom she began calling Ashley, though the alien never spoke, slowly regained strength and took to gathering dry branches from the edge of the forest. The avian, whose voice was melodic and sharp, introduced himself as Luro and began assisting her with scouting. He had a keen sense of smell and could detect changes in wind and moisture. His presence doubled their reach. What had started as solitary survival had shifted. Tara felt the difference in the air. The others didn't treat her like a leader in the traditional sense. No one deferred or saluted. But when she moved, they followed. When she assigned, they listened. She didn't issue commands, she showed them, and they copied her. In the late afternoon, another visitor arrived, this one uninvited. He was tall and armored in thick scales. His eyes glowed faintly, and his breathing was slow, deliberate. His gait was aggressive, shoulders squared, hands clenched. Tara watched from her shelter entrance as he stepped into the clearing. He carried no injuries, no burns, no signs of dehydration, but his posture was unmistakably hostile. "Human," he said in near-perfect galactic common. His voice was smooth, but laced with contempt. "You're fire. Give it to me." Burrow rose immediately, wings flexing, but Tara motioned for him to stay seated. She stepped forward, meeting the reptilian's stare. "You're welcome to share it," she replied, "but you won't take it." He let out a short laugh. "You think this place belongs to you?" "No, but the effort does." She pointed to the others, seated around the camp. "If you're too proud to learn, keep walking." The reptilian's face darkened. He took one step forward. Luro tensed behind her, claws clicking. Tara didn't move. Kirik stood shakily, leaning on a branch, and positioned himself between the fire and the newcomer. Ashley, quiet and limping, shifted closer to Tara's side. There was no violence. There didn't need to be. The message was clear. The reptilian sneered. "You'll regret this," he muttered, then turned and disappeared into the forest. Tara exhaled. Her legs trembled slightly, but she didn't let it show. She turned back to the group. No words passed between them, but she saw it in their eyes. Acknowledgement, respect. As dusk settled in, she taught Ashley how to bind split bark using heated vines soaked in stream water. She demonstrated how to twist the fibers while they were hot, letting them cool into a hardened seal. Ashley watched intently, then attempted the motion herself, her thick claws surprisingly precise. Crix finished stacking firewood. Luro returned with a bundle of dried leaves and 3 new pods which Tara suspected might contain oil or drinkable sap. The camp glowed with soft, flickering light as night fell. A calm settled over the group. Tara watched each of them in turn and realized something she hadn't dared hope for. This was more than a shelter. It was a system, a rhythm, a model. She sat at the edge of the fire, legs crossed, palms open. Her hands were cracked, fingers blistered, and her back ached. But she felt grounded, centered. She had not expected companionship here, but what had formed around her was something even more powerful than friendship. It was mutual survival, born of earned trust. The Arbiter's voice had not been heard since the beginning. No updates, no scores, no intervention. But Tara knew someone, somewhere was watching. Let him. She leaned back on her elbows and looked up at the stars. If tomorrow brought more broken beings to her fire, she would make room. If another arrogant fool showed up demanding fire without earning it, she'd push back again. She didn't come here to compete. She came here to endure. And now others were enduring with her. On the 4th morning, Tara awoke to an unnatural silence. The wind, which usually whispered through the brittle canopy above her camp, had vanished. The sky above held an unnatural stillness. Too perfect, too balanced. She sat up slowly, her body stiff from another night on woven bark and compressed moss. Luro was already awake, perched on a branch above the fire pit, his feathers puffed slightly in alertness. He didn't speak, but she could tell he sensed it too. Something was about to shift. Ashley remained asleep near the rear of the shelter, her breathing steady, and Crix sat cross-legged near the water basin, polishing a curved stone into a smoother edge. Tara moved quietly to the edge of the camp, stepping between stacked bundles of soap pods and coiled vine rope. The air was warmer than usual, thick with static. She narrowed her eyes toward the tree line. A low hum reached her ears, mechanical, pulsing rhythmically. She turned her head slowly, then froze. Descending from the sky above the eastern ridge was a massive silver orb, its surface gleaming like liquid mercury. It hovered silently for a moment before projecting a wide horizontal beam across the forest. The trees glowed under the beam's light, their skeletal branches shimmering as if touched by frost. The hum intensified. Tara crouched, her fingers brushing the earth instinctively. Crix rose and moved to her side, his antennae quivering. "The Arbiter is scanning," he said in a strained voice. "But this is not routine. It's judgment." The orb moved again, this time projecting beams in 3 separate directions, each ending in a sharp pillar of red light aimed toward the sky. Tara clenched her jaw. If the game masters were watching this closely now, something had changed. Either her progress had triggered curiosity, or someone had challenged her. Before she could speculate further, movement stirred near the southern edge of the clearing. A figure emerged from the forest. Taller than Luro, wider than Crix, and wearing an exosuit that looked like it had been manually disabled. She recognized the reptilian from 2 days earlier, the one who had demanded her fire and walked away when refused. He was not alone now. Flanking him were 2 others, a female of the same species with a heavily scarred jaw and a feline humanoid with sharpened metal rings around each finger. The 3 stood at the edge of the camp with expressions that required no translation. Luro dropped from the tree and stood between them and the fire. Ashley stirred behind Tara, instinctively rolling toward the nearest tool. A sharpened branch tipped with fossilized resin. Tara remained still, her posture calm but ready. "I warned you," the reptilian said in a low growl. "You act like this land is yours. You build, You gather, you hoard, but you don't share unless it's on your terms. Tara stood and stepped forward. Nothing is hoarded. What we use, we make. What we make, we teach. You didn't want to learn. You claim nobility, the female hissed, but what you offer is control. You turned this into your nest, and now others orbit you like moons around a dying star. The feline stepped forward. His voice was cold. We came for fire, not a philosophy lecture. Crick stepped beside Tara. Then earn it, he said, same as we did. The orb above the camp pulsed again, louder now. A second, smaller drone split from its underside and descended to hover between the two groups, its transparent dome rotating slowly, recording. Tara understood what this was. The Arbiter was no longer observing passively. This had become a test of social structure, of leadership, of cohesion under pressure. The reptilian male stepped closer. If we take your fire, we take your camp. Your laws. That ends now. Tara raised one hand and looked at him. You think you're challenging me. You're not. You're challenging what we built. Go ahead, tear it down, but ask yourself, when the night comes and you're freezing, who will rebuild it? He glared at her, his nostrils flaring. His companion said nothing. A long silence stretched between the two groups. Then, without a word, the reptilian turned and drove his fist into one of the water basins. The stone cracked. Water spilled. Luro reacted first, leaping forward and knocking the reptilian back. The camp exploded into motion. Ashley limped forward with her makeshift spear raised, and the feline lunged toward Crick's, claws glinting. Tara stepped in between Luro and the reptilian, grabbing the avian's shoulder. No, she said. Stand down. But I said stand down. She turned to the reptilian, who had regained his footing, breathing heavily. You want to destroy something? Go ahead. But every drop of that water took hours to purify. Every piece of shelter you see took days to build. You haven't made anything since you arrived here. You've only tried to take. Is that the legacy you want to leave when this is over? The reptilian stared at her, chest heaving. His female companion looked away. The feline narrowed his eyes but remained still. The orb above them dimmed, the drone slowly retreating into its shell. Silence again. This time, not from tension, but resolution. The reptilian said nothing. He turned and walked away, his companions following. That evening the camp remained quiet. No new visitors arrived. The air was heavy with the remnants of confrontation, but the fire burned strong. Ashley returned to repairing the broken basin, using tree resin and ash to seal the crack. Crix and Luro worked together to create a second filter to replace the lost one. Tara sat alone for a while near the edge of the forest, watching the stars appear. The tension had drained her, but more than that, she felt the weight of influence now. She hadn't come to Oxera 9 to lead. She had come to survive, but the line between the two had blurred, and that brought pressure. As she closed her eyes for a moment, she heard footsteps behind her. It was Crix. You stopped them without violence, he said quietly. She opened her eyes. I wasn't sure I could. You did. The others believe in this place now. In you, she nodded once. Then I need to keep it worthy of their belief. He stepped back into the shelter, leaving her alone under the shifting constellations. The drone's red scan beam no longer crossed the camp. The Arbiter had seen enough. Tara lay back on the ground and looked toward the horizon. The fifth day would come with new trials, new visitors, maybe even more confrontation. But the camp had endured, and now it had defended itself without losing what made it different. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was defining survival for everyone else. By the time the sixth day had ended, Tara had begun to notice changes in the forest. The winds had grown more restless, carrying with them an electricity that seemed to crackle between branches. The soil had begun to shift, subtly but unmistakably, as if the planet itself was preparing for something. She had not seen the reptilian group again, nor had she sent anyone to look for them. Her focus remained within the boundary of what her camp had become, a structured, resilient circle of beings who had learned to survive without demanding, without conquering. That evening she gathered the others near the fire. Ashley sat closest to the flame, stirring a pot of boiled roots with a carved stick. Crick stood sharpening tools made from stone and resin. Luro watched the sky, his iridescent feathers shifting with the light. Tara looked at each of them in silence, committing their faces to memory. "We don't know what tomorrow brings," she said, her voice calm, steady. "But I know this. If the Arbiter asks what we've accomplished, we won't speak of fire or filtered water. We'll speak of how we held together. That's what will be remembered." No one replied. But Ashley reached out and placed a clawed hand on Tara's wrist, firm and brief. It was more than agreement. It was solidarity. The next morning broke without warning. Before the twin suns had fully risen, the clearing was bathed in an unnatural golden glow. The light came not from the sky, but from the ground itself, seeping up in slow-moving waves that shimmered across the soil. Tara stepped outside the shelter and looked upward. The orb had returned, but this time it brought others. 7 smaller spheres hovered in formation, each marked with the insignia of a different galactic faction. The largest among them bore the insignia of the Arbiter, a shifting silver prism that moved like liquid metal. The central orb began to descend slowly until it hovered just above the ground, no more than 2 meters from where Tara stood. A panel on its surface slid open with a whisper, revealing a translucent projection chamber. From it, a figure emerged. Not physical, but so detailed in light and texture that Tara instinctively took a step back. The figure was tall, neither male nor female in obvious terms, but with features that hinted at both. Its eyes were milky white, its expression unreadable. It raised one hand, and its voice echoed with smooth authority. "The primitive trials have concluded. The forest stilled. Even the insects seemed to pause." The voice continued. "Of 91 participants, only 22 remain active. 8 have formed survival collectives. 3 have demonstrated hostile dominance. 1 has demonstrated sustainable leadership." The projection turned to face Tara. "You are the anomaly." Tara didn't move. Behind her, she heard Crick step forward, but she raised one hand slightly to signal stillness. "You did not seek followers," the Arbiter's voice continued. "You did not exploit. You did not isolate. You adapted. You shared. You taught. And others followed because they chose to, not because they were compelled." A new sphere floated closer, projecting imagery into the air, holographic moments captured throughout the week. Tara striking flint, Ashley gathering branches with a torn limb, Lura carving a basin, Crix helping others layer charcoal into a filter. Her camp came to life above her, a translucent model rotating slowly in the golden light. Another voice spoke now, different in tone, slower, heavier. "Your actions have altered the evaluation criterion. This was not intended to be a test of diplomacy, but your structure has proven more resilient than aggression, more durable than solitude." The Arbiter stepped forward again. "Tara Ramirez of Earth, you are offered placement as primary instructor in the Cross-Species Survival Initiative. Do you accept?" She blinked. "I wasn't trying to be an instructor," she said, voice low. "That," the projection replied, "is precisely why you were chosen." She turned her head to look back at the others. Ashley gave a slow nod. Luro tilted his head, his expression unreadable but calm. Croc smiled faintly, antennae twitching. She took a breath. "I'll accept, but only if I can bring them with me." There was a pause. "Approved." Light cascaded across the clearing. The golden waves intensified, enveloping her camp and the beings within it. Tara felt the pressure lift from her chest, the pressure of raw survival. Not relief, not joy, but something deeper. Completion. When the light faded, the forest remained. The shelters were gone, the fire pit had vanished, the water basins, the drying pods, the carved stone, all erased. The land was restored to untouched wilderness. But the people, Tara, Ashley, Luro, Crix, now stood aboard a new platform, metallic and sleek, high above Oxera 9. Before them stretched the command deck of a vessel she had never seen before. Panels blinked softly. Clean air filled her lungs. She looked down at her hands, still calloused, still blistered. A figure approached, this time physical. An alien with 3 arms and brilliant sapphire skin. He offered a small, handheld terminal to Tara. Your curriculum, he said with a formal nod. Galactic academies have requested immediate implementation. She stared at the terminal, then turned it over in her palm. A list of course names appeared, each bearing her name beneath the title. At the top, Primitive Adaptation, Leadership Through Necessity. She looked out through the viewport. Oxera 9 had shrunk to a speck, its harsh terrain now distant, its trials finished. Ashley stepped beside her and pointed toward the stars. LaRue said softly, "New worlds," Crix finished for them. "New students," Tara smiled faintly. "No weapons, no hierarchy, no dominance, just shared knowledge." That, she knew now, was the real legacy. And it was only the beginning.